Turn off any audio coming out of that. And anything else.
I thought I did turn off the audio. Did you slow that down a notch? That's a 5-second delay there.
This is GNN.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Gallant, your Conservative Member of Parliament for the riding of Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke, where sportsmen come to enjoy the great outdoors. Welcome to GNN, special edition we're calling The Gun Show. So the so-called mainstream media works hand in hand with the Trudeau Liberals to berate gun owners. That's why it's important we get the facts. And we need to get these facts out on how this Liberal government is directly affecting your lives. Now, to help me unpack these issues, I'm pleased to be joined by the president of the Canadian Shooting Sports Association, Tony Bern. Thank you for joining me, Tony.
Always a pleasure, Cheryl.
This is GNN.
Tony, the Liberals started, after they were elected, by quietly setting to work to peel away, regulation by regulation, the freedoms of law-abiding firearms owners, just months after being elected. So they began by announcing they were going to ignore the Common Sense Firearms Licensing Act, the bill that required the public safety minister to approve any firearms reclassifications by the RCMP. The RCMP will have to have the free rein to implement the firearms reclassifications. So what do law-abiding gun owners need to know in order to keep themselves safe under this new Liberal agenda?
Well, that's a great question, because the average law-abiding firearms owner out there has no way of knowing whether or not the RCMP have banned something yesterday. And in fact, since the Liberal government took over, they've banned a number of different magazines and even some firearms. And these are things that no public announcement is being made to the people of Canada, and yet there are literally hundreds of thousands, perhaps more, of these magazines floating around. People bought them legally, and they don't know that they're now in possession of a prohibited device.
Okay, so the RCMP has already been defying C-42 prior to this announcement with a ruling on the Ruker 1022 magazines. This is putting the police in charge of changing the laws. Now, it took an act of parliament to retake power to classify what is legal and what's not. How are firearms owners even supposed to learn about this? Usually people show me the letters they receive in the mail, but nobody has received a letter.
Well, no, they can't receive a letter because magazines are not a regulated item. So people can just go into their local Cabela's or Bass Pro Shop or whatever and just buy a magazine off the shelf. It's just a part. And now all of a sudden these things are prohibited. People have no way of knowing at all. And you know, it's not just the 1022 magazines. There have been several of them that have been banned since the Liberals took office.
Okay, so maybe you could go into a little detail on what this magazine is and the basis upon which the CMP arbitrarily decided to ban them.
Well, first of all, you're looking at the Ruger 1022 magazines, and that's one of the most common magazines in Canada. Our import records say there's over 1 million of them have been brought into the country since the mid-1960s. They're all over the place, everywhere. The other firearms magazines that have been brought in that they've now declared to be prohibited are the LAR-15 pistol mags and the 50 Beowulf mags. These magazines are built on the AR-15 platform, and they're used extensively in games like three-gun shooting and IPSC, all of these sport competitions that are that are being done with these types of firearms, these magazines are used extensively. There are tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of these things already in the country. And now if you have one, you're in possession of a prohibited device. This is very serious. You can go to jail for years for possession of a prohibited device.
So if you're hunting this fall and you're just pulled over and they ask to see your firearms and they find one of these magazines, are you saying they can take away all your firearms because you have one of these magazines that you did not even receive a letter in the mail about to say was illegal?
It's worse than that. They can not only take away your magazines, they can take away your freedom. There's a 3-year jail term attached to a possession of a prohibited device.
So we have essentially a new law. It has not been presented in Parliament. Nobody's received a letter on it. How are we supposed to find out about these things?
You find out when they put the handcuffs on you. Seriously. People don't know what the RCMP have been doing here. And it is absolutely reprehensible that the government of the day lets the people who enforce our laws create our laws. There's a word for that, Cheryl. It's called a police state.
Okay. Hi, we're back, and we had a question from Doug in Renfrew, but that's a case-oriented question, so we'll come back to you, Doug, when we're offline to go into the specifics of that. So next, after putting the RCMP in charge of essentially making new laws with respect to guns, the Liberals introduced Bill C-47, an act to make it too expensive to own firearms. Can you explain further, Tony, the repercussions of Bill C-47, which makes changes to the tracking and exporting of guns from Canada?
Yeah, the worst part of C-47 is it's the enabling legislation that will allow Canada to enter into the United Nations Arms Trade Treaty. Now, the Arms Trade Treaty is a very large, very sweeping treaty that basically covers all types of arms and parts and all that sort of thing. Everything that isn't nuclear, chemical, or biological is covered under the Arms Trade Treaty, and it includes things that you would never believe, like, for example, GPS devices for your vehicles, things like airbags for your car. These things are all controlled goods governed underneath the Arms Trade Treaty auspices. But the worst part is that every 6 years, the Arms Trade Treaty Conference holds a review, and in that review, any change, that is, any change, can be made to the Arms Trade Treaty with a simple 75% majority of the countries attending the conference. Now, we know many countries in the world are respectful of freedoms and certainly respectful of our sovereignty, but we also know there are many, many countries in the world that are not and would mean to do us harm in any way they possibly could. And we're going to give voluntarily the authority for those countries to decide our laws, including domestic laws, with a 75% majority to the United Nations. This is insane. And I know that the previous minister, Minister Bern, was very, very aware of this. And consequently, the previous government never signed the Arms Trade Treaty. But now it's back to roost. The Liberals have now got on the order paper the enabling legislation they will need to enter into the treaty. Isn't that wonderful?
So the UN, that's the same body from which C-68, the whole gun bill, originated in the first place.
Well, I would think there's a deep suspicion of that, because when you look at things like the Australian legislation that was brought in roughly about the same time as ours, there are entire paragraphs written in those legislations that are identical, absolutely identical. Somewhere in there was a common hand.
Okay, so if you could give me for example, what sort of initiative could they bring forth under this treaty in 6 years you mentioned with a 75% majority? What kind of imposition on our freedoms could they bring forth?
Well, they could simply say there's no international movement of optical devices. So that means no more telescopic sights. That means no more binoculars. That means no more telescopes. That could mean anything that they say it means. They could say that all ammunition has to be serial numbered. Now, can you serial number a little round of 22? Yes, you can. It's just really, really expensive. And they could do that quite simply with the stroke of a pen, and they could completely cripple the entire civilian arms industry right across the whole globe by doing something like that.
Okay, we're going to take a short break and check out questions people have, and we'll be back in about 5 seconds.
This is GNN.
Hi, welcome back. I see Kathy in Florida is tuning in. Nice to have a break this time of day. Now, Tony, using a cloud of smoke from the pot bill, Trudeau committed Canada to a UN treaty that was already in place to meet the requirements. On the Friday night of the May 2-4 weekend, the Liberals posted the UN firearms marking regulations, and that's supposed to come into effect in December of 2018. What changes will gun owners need to be aware of in regards to these marking regulations?
We aren't sure yet, because the reason that they pulled back and deferred the implementation date, which was June 1st, was because they wanted to make substantive changes to the text of the marking regulation. We're hearing all kinds of wild rumors. They range everything from going to an American style system where the firearms importer's name and address is engraved on the receiver of the firearm, to them accepting a simple serial number. We really don't know what it's going to be, but these marking regulations have been hanging over our head like the sword of Damocles for the last 13 years, and we would really wish them to just go away, and let us go back to legally bringing in firearms with all the same responsibilities that Canada's always had in the past.
Okay, so now on that same Friday night of the long weekend, in text tucked beneath the UN markings regulations, the Liberals have announced that in December of 2017, there will be an end to the long gun amnesty currently in place. What should long gun owners do to prepare for this event? And is there any way to have them stop from making this change?
I don't know if enough political pressure or enough pressure from the grassroots will make them rethink this. But to recap, this is an amnesty that was put in place by the former Conservative government to allow people who had long guns and had let their licenses expire for whatever reason. Remember when the long gun registry was shut down, many people interpreted that to mean that the entire Firearms Act was shut down, and they let their licenses lapse, thinking that they no longer needed to get licensed. Well, the amnesty was put in place to allow people who needed to get licensed the breathing room to actually go and get the license without fear of criminal charge. That's going to be gone in December 1st. I think it's a very, very foolish move on the part of the Liberal government, because what it does realistically is expose people to a liability that they really haven't earned. A lot of people simply don't know, because the firearms program in Canada has been so terrible at communication, just terrible. And so they don't even know what their obligations are under this thing now.
Okay, we're going to take a short break. There's a 5-second delay. I can see when it comes back. Okay, most recently, like last Friday, there was another announcement made. There was another bill tabled. Can you tell us what this bill is about and what it means? Is it the beginning of the reconstruction of the long gun registry?
Well, I think with some certainty we can say yes, although it may not be a Canada-wide long gun registry. What the bill does is it permits the government of Canada to give Quebec the data that they wanted so that Quebec can go ahead with their long gun
I'm not
registry.
sure what he said.
Now, it may be quite possible that we're only talking about Quebec's long gun registry, but it's also equally possible we're talking about any province that wants it. And that brings us to a whole new point. Why is the data still there? The previous government ordered the data destroyed. Everything except Quebec's data was destroyed until the 27th of March 2015, when the Supreme Court of Canada ruled in favor of the federal government and ordered Quebec's data destroyed. Did the RCMP find themselves in contempt of Parliament and in contempt of the Supreme Court of Canada by retaining illegal copies of this data? I think we all want to know this. And then, of course, the second thing is that the Trudeau government said they wouldn't reintroduce the long gun registry. Well, you know what? That's bull. Because if they give Quebec the data, they have reconstructed the long gun registry in Quebec. They lied.
Okay, so we had a situation before C-42 came in, that which required the Minister of Public Safety to authorize any reclassifications to a firearm. Then we have Prime Minister Trudeau turning around and saying, you know what, let's forget that. Let's put the RCMP in charge. They know better than us. Let them decide whether or not anything needs reclassifying. And now we find that the data still exists after a law was passed to have it deleted.
Two laws. Well, the Supreme Court ruled it had to be destroyed too.
Okay, so what does that make Canada?
It's looking like a police state, okay? Because I'm sorry, when the police are the ones who make the laws and enforce the laws, that's what you call it. No matter how kind and how benevolent they might be, we don't elect our politicians so that the police can make the laws. Our politicians make the laws. We're a democracy. This is absolutely reprehensible behavior, and it leaves the question of who the hell is watching the store?
Okay.
If our elected government's not keeping control over the RCMP, we need new elected government really quickly.
And the bill tabled on Friday gives Quebec not just the Quebec data, but all of the data.
Well, presuming it exists, I mean, the RCMP have not definitively said whether or not the data has been destroyed. So I'm going to make the assumption that it hasn't been, because I'm at the point now where after so many years of doing my job, I no longer trust them to tell the truth. So I'm going to make the assumption that the RCMP have not deleted the data. That means that not only are they committing a crime, but the Liberal government is aiding and abetting that crime and breaking their promise not to reintroduce a long gun registry. I'm sorry, I might live in Alberta and it doesn't hit me directly, but I might live in Montreal and they're reintroducing that long gun registry to those people in Montreal, and they're Canadians too.
So if we look at that bill, plus the C-47, the UN Firearms Treaty, that requires electronic recording of all purchases, what does that give us when we put the two together?
Well, I mean, it gives us a government that's intruding into every single part of Canada's life. I'd like to say that there was some factor in this that was redeeming, but there isn't. It's just more of the same old nonsense we've come to expect from the Liberal governments of past days. So, I mean, any hopes that firearms owners had that this government was going to give them a more of a fair shake than the Chrétien government. I think they're going to be a little disappointed here.
All right. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for bringing us up to date, Tony. Tony with the Canadian Sports Shooting Association joining us to answer the questions today. Thank you very much. Thank you for those who have joined us today. And we hope that there are not future changes that are taking away our rights with respect to firearms. But we'll keep you tuned in. Thanks again. Bye now.
This is GNN.